Hello and welcome. You're watching World Panorama, your weekly roundup of all the big international news stories. I'm Ishan Russell, and these are the headlines that we're tracking this week. Stark images from the Syrian civil war focus world attention on the humanitarian cost of the conflict. Debate rages on the dangerous situation created by the major global powers in the tussle in the country. Russia uses Iranian air bases to mount airstrikes on Syria, even as a study claims it has killed more civilians last year than the Islamic State. Jihadist group retaliates with an attack on a Moscow police station. US presidential campaign shifts from the ideological to the personal. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump step up insults against each other. And Turkey paves the way for conditional release of 38,000 prisoners. The presidential decree is seen as a measure to make space in prisons to accommodate thousands of people arrested after the failed coup. Now, focus this week. More than 250,000 people, yes, 250,000 people have died ever since the Syrian conflict began. Millions of families have been displaced. Children are the worst victims. Earlier this week, the grim reality of the human cost of the war was captured by heart-rending images from the city of Aleppo, one of the fiercest battlegrounds. Images that have focused world attention on all the actors in this out-of-control war between the regime of President Assad and his opponents.
The grim reality of the ongoing war in Syria can clearly be seen in the faces of these children. Covered in dust from head to toe, these children were pulled out of the rubble of a building in Aleppo after it was hit by airstrikes. The little boy sits dazed and silent, trying to get a grip on what's happening around him, trying to wipe the blood from his badly injured face. Barely 4 years old, more than half his life has been spent in the violent zone. Aleppo has seen some of the worst fighting since the civil war began in August 2014. The fight for control over the city between the government and the rebels has intensified in recent weeks. Hundreds have died and many others are deprived of basic necessities.
As we are asking, and I again insist on behalf of the Secretary General of the UN and of all the Syrian people, to have a 48-hour pause in Aleppo to start with, that would require some heavy lifting from not only the two co-chairs, but also those who have an influence on those who are fighting on the ground.
The United Nations says that 2 million people lack access to clean water in Aleppo, creating a risk of disease. Technicians are not being allowed access to repair electricity networks that drive water pumping stations. 8 convoys have also not reached Syria's besieged towns in August.
Due to the lack of a pause, no humanitarian aid is reaching anywhere Syria at the moment except the resort, and Aleppo is still eastern Aleppo besieged and western Aleppo in threat of becoming besieged.
The violence, however, is not restricted to Aleppo. This footage shows the immediate aftermath of airstrikes in Damascus, serving as a tragic reminder that the conflict is nationwide, from Aleppo in the north to homes in central Syria and Damascus further south. The dire situation has forced another appeal from the UN Secretary General, who warns of an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe in Syria. He has also urged Russia and the United States to quickly reach a deal on a ceasefire in the war-torn country. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And we're joined by Professor Pasha from the Center for West Asian Studies at JNU to help us understand, Professor Pasha. The images are heart-rending, that little child, and is the suffering that's been going on for so many, for almost more than a year now. And it's rather heart-rending that nobody's, we might be expressing horror, but in terms of the real ground situation, nothing's changed.
Yes, the casualties are mounting, as you mentioned, more than 2.5 lakh estimated, but 3 or 4 times more injured, and about 5 to 6 million refugees scattered in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, European countries, and other Arab countries. It is mounting. The civilian suffering is mounting day by day. But now what has got the attention of the entire world is the suffering, especially in Aleppo, which is now a battleground for the jihadis who control part of the city in the east, and the government which controls the western part. And this control of Aleppo, the largest Syrian city, is crucial because that would really decide who is in control of much of Syria, which has been ravaged by war. And in this, there are two new factors. One is the Russian bombers, which used to come all the way from Russia, were detected, and intelligence was passed on to the jihadis.
Right.
And they had enough time to escape. And to avoid this detection, the Russians are using the Iranian air bases, which gives them very little time to escape from the hideouts from which they are bombarding the eastern part of from the eastern part of Aleppo. And also the Russians are using their battleships in the Mediterranean and in the other areas also in the Caspian Sea to launch cruise missiles. Very unprecedented bombardment is going on. Apart from the Americans, the NATO planes.
Right, and
also.
I'll come to the fact of this new alignment of forces that you talked about Russian planes taking off from Iran. But coming back to the human cost, as you were just mentioning, the fact that nobody is really paying attention, the UN is completely out of it. It's become a power game between the global powers, and it's indiscriminate bombing. I mean, there would be civilian casualties, of course, then.
Of course. I mean, on both sides, people are suffering. But what is particularly alarming is about 3 lakh people who are trapped in these 2 zones of Aleppo. And they don't have electricity, no running water, hospitals are being targeted, and the number of injured who want to leave desperately that place also are under attack. So there is no supplies, in fact, are reaching. Even the UN mandated supplies are not reaching. So there is this fear of starvation and deaths on a large scale, which don't seem to attract the attention of the international bodies or the powers which are involved deeply in supplying weapons to these 2 groups.
All right, we'll talk about the geopolitics around this entire tussle in a bit, but let's just play out a story about what's been happening, because a new study claims that the Russian forces have now killed more Syrian civilians than the Islamic State. Research by the Syrian Network for Human Rights says that the Russian strikes killed 2,704 civilians in the last year, while the jihadist group has killed 2,686 people since April 2013. On Friday, Russia said it was prepared to offer a 48-hour humanitarian pause in the fighting in Aleppo to allow food and medicine to reach civilians. Meanwhile, opening another front in the war, the Islamic State released a video claiming responsibility for carrying out an attack at a traffic police post outside Moscow. The terror group called it revenge for Russia's aerial bombing campaign in Syria.
The terror group Islamic State on Friday claimed responsibility for an attack on a traffic police post outside Moscow on Wednesday. Both attackers were killed in the attack that the Islamic State termed as revenge for Russia's aerial bombing campaign in Syria.
Мы мujahidi исламского государства находимся под боятом Абу Бакр аль-Багдади аль-Курайши и вышли на этот путь, на путь джихада по приказу нашего амира.
The militant group made the claim via the Amaq news agency and released a video in which the attackers said they wanted to take revenge for Russia killing Muslims in the Middle East.
Мы находимся в Москве по приказу нашего амира, нашего халифа Абу Бакр аль-Багдади, который приказал нам делать все, что в наших силах.
Russia is bombing militants in Syria since last September as part of a military campaign in support of President Bashar al-Assad. On Wednesday, it used an Iranian airbase to launch airstrikes in Syria for a 2nd day running. It rejected US suggestions that its cooperation with Tehran might violate a UN resolution.
Никаких поводов подозревать Россию в нарушении резолюции 2231 не имеется. Согласно этой резолюции, необходимо согласовывать с Советом Безопасности ООН поставку, продажу и передачу.
Russia's defense ministry said Sukhoi 34 fighter bombers flying from Iran's Hamadan air base struck Islamic State targets in Syria's Deir al-Zor province, destroying 2 command posts and killing more than 150 militants.
Боевые самолеты с согласия Ирана используются российскими воздушно-космическими силами для участия в антитеррористической операции на территории Сирийской Арабской Республики по просьбе законного сирийского руководства.
Washington called the move unfortunate and said on Tuesday it was looking into whether Russia's move had violated UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which prohibits the supply, sale and transfer of combat aircraft to Iran. Russia's use of the Iranian airbase comes amid intense fighting for the Syrian city of Aleppo, where rebels are battling Syrian government forces backed by the Russian military. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And Professor A.K. Pasha from the Center for West Asian Studies at JNU is with us in the studio, helping us understand as far as this conflict now is concerned. Let's understand the geopolitics around this entire tussle and Russia and Iran now aligning.
Yes, this is something very new because earlier it was Iran separately and independently supporting the Bashar regime. And the Russians had their military presence in the naval base and the air base also, which they ostensibly withdrew some time back. But now there is this coordinated attacks using the Iranian air bases, as I mentioned, to give very little time to the jihadis who were escaping the bombing campaign, intense bombing campaign which the Russians have launched, because the intelligence which these jihadis would get, the Russians suspected it was coming from NATO or the Americans which were using the Incirlik base in Turkey, which Turkey has now offered to the Russians also because of the new growing cooperation between them. So this Moscow, Tehran, Damascus cooperation, I think, is causing much alarm in the Western circles, especially the signaling of the Islamic State strongholds, the accumulation of the weapons, armored personnel carriers, tanks and other heavy artillery there.
All right. Another news reports has also come out about being involved is Beijing. China also coming into this. Which side does it stand, and how does that tilt the power balance? Do we see the Western powers versus sort of the Eastern powers, if I may call them?
Yeah, there were rumors earlier that the Chinese are going to send weapons and then soldiers also, but now it is becoming very obvious that about 5,000 special forces from the Chinese People's Army are seen fighting the Islamic State on behalf of the forces there, because about 6,000 to 7,000 Uyghurs from Xinjiang province, mostly Muslim-dominated province in the southwestern part of China, they have been facilitated by Turkey and other countries to reach the Islamic State area. So they are considered as a big threat by the Chinese to destabilize the Xinjiang province and then eventually China. So I'm not very surprised that the Chinese have responded very robustly, along with the Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah and the Syrians, of course. So it is mainly targeted towards the Islamic State, towards which the West was talking about not doing enough.
All right.
So in that, the Chinese are now a major player.
All right, but doing enough versus not doing enough, I mean, the human catastrophe still goes on. In talking about the fight against the Islamic State, the ultimate purpose of this entire bombardment campaign, how far has that progressed? News often trickles in of significant gains being made, but then a little later the news comes in that no, that gain wasn't that significant in terms of gaining territory from the Islamic State.
There are two theaters. One is the Iraqi theater. They are still, Islamic State is still entrenched in the Mosul area, but they have been dislodged from at least 5-6 major towns. So that is a major gain. The Iraqis, along with the Iranians and other forces, they have been able to push back the Islamic State. And in Syria, they have been dislodged from Manij, the border town between Turkey and Raqqa. They have been completely liquidated, and they have been pushed back. But there are also many towns which are under the control of the Islamic State, and it is simply becoming difficult because of the location of the Kurdish people who are now armed and supported by the Americans, but the Russians are against it. That's how now the new people, along with the Islamic State, who are suffering, and Syrians also, is the Kurdish people in Syria. Because of the new alliance between Russia and Turkey, because the Turks are alarmed by the American support to the Syrian Kurds. So now Russia is on the side of Turkey. So Turks, the Syrian Kurds are the new casualty, and their numbers are increasing because the towns are also coming under attack because of the location near the Islamic State. So all of these new developments are escalating the human suffering, the tragedy, and unfortunately the UN Human Rights Commission and other agencies which are waiting with hundreds of trucks loaded with basic essential things to be sent to these besieged areas. It is not proving to be a success under these
it's not just the bombs, it's the hunger that, so many other aspects of human suffering that are involved in this conflict.
Terrible human tragedy.
Terrible tragedy in our times. Professor Pasha, thank you very much for coming in and helping us understand the calamity that's at hand. Thank you so much for that. On that note, we'll take a very quick break. Lots more on the other side. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama. Now, in the United States, temperatures are soaring in the presidential campaign that is taking the shape of a personal fight rather than an ideological one between the two contestants. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are pulling out the stops in insulting each other across the country.
As the November 8th election approaches, the campaigns of both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are becoming increasingly aggressive. On the campaign trail, both nominees hardly let go of any opportunity to deride the other. On Tuesday, Clinton was in West Philadelphia, where she told supporters that Donald Trump was created fear and pessimism in American voters.
I was thinking the other day, when Donald Trump speaks, he speaks about fear. He speaks about such negativity and such pessimism. And then I watch the Olympics, and it's exactly the opposite. You have young people going out doing their best every day to get prepared to compete. And that's what we're going to do in America.
The Republican presidential nominee, on the other hand, called for more police on the streets, saying Hillary Clinton was against the police. Trump visited Milwaukee days after the city was hit by unrest over the fatal police shooting of a black man. He said initial evidence pointed that the shooting was justified.
Crime and violence is an attack on the poor and will never be accepted in a Trump administration. The narrative has been pushed aggressively for years, and now by our current administration and pushed by my opponent, Hillary Clinton, is a totally false one. You know that. The problem in our poorest communities is not that there are too many police. The problem is that there are not enough police.
His aggressive rhetoric apart, Trump has fallen behind in opinion polls. The former Secretary of State has a 6 percentage point lead over Trump in a latest poll. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Now, Nigerian militant group Boko Haram published a video last Sunday showing recent footage of dozens of schoolgirls kidnapped from 2 years ago from the Chibok town in 2014. In the video published on social media, a masked man standing behind dozens of girls said that some of the girls have been killed in airstrikes. Meanwhile, some of the parents of the abducted girls voiced some relief after the release of the video as they identified their daughters from the video. Nigerian Information Minister assured in a statement that the government was on top of the situation to free the girls. Over 270 girls were abducted from a government school in the town of Chibok in Nigeria in April 2014 by Boko Haram. While more than 50 girls escaped, more than 200 still remain missing.
A makaranta.
Me sunan asalin sunan makarantar?
GSS.
GSS ne?
Chibok.
To sai abu na gaba kuma yanzu kin kai kaman shekara nawa ne a nan wajen?
Shekara ya kai kaman 2.
Now, Myanmar's Foreign Minister Aung San Suu Kyi met Chinese President Xi Jinping on her visit to Beijing on Friday. During the meeting, Xi Jinping promised that China will continue to play a constructive role in promoting Myanmar's peace process and work with the country to safeguard peace and stability in the border areas. Both China and Myanmar share long borders, and Beijing has deployed military at the border last year after 5 people were killed in firing by a Myanmarese jet plane. Myanmar also sought Beijing's support for negotiations with armed groups. Now, much else has unfolded around the world this week. Here is the roundup of the other international news of the week in Globe Watch.
An airstrike on a Yemeni hospital on Monday killed at least 11 people, injuring at least 15 others. The hospital is operated by the humanitarian group Doctors Without Borders. The strike was the latest in an increasing number of attacks targeting places commonly used by civilians, including hospitals where MSF doctors and nurses work. The Speaker of Iran's parliament has stressed that Russia does not have a permanent military base within the Islamic Republic. This, a day after Moscow announced launching airstrikes on Syria from Iran. Russian warplanes being allowed to take off from Iranian territory is an unprecedented move, and it underscores the deepening cooperation between the two powerhouses heavily invested in the Syrian civil war. The comments by the Speaker are geared at easing domestic concerns over the strikes. Turkey issued a decree this week paving way for the conditional release of 38,000 prisoners. The decree allows the release of inmates who have 2 years or less to serve of their prison terms. The move is being seen to reduce the country's prison population to make space for thousands of people who have been arrested as part of an investigation into last month's failed coup. Pakistan's Election Commission asked its Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to reply on petitions filed by the opposition parties seeking his disqualification for hiding information about his alleged offshore wealth revealed by the Panama Papers leak within 20 days. The commission also issued notices to Sharif's son-in-law, country's finance minister, and the chief minister of Punjab province. In a survey conducted by Economist Intelligence Unit, Paris saw the biggest decline in a poll of the most pleasant cities to live in. The city dropped 3.7% on the scale, ranking 32 out of 140 cities. Paris featured on the list of the 10 cities that faced the biggest declines, such as Damascus, Kiev, Detroit, and Tripoli. The study blamed this on the mounting number of terrorist attacks taking place in the city and other parts of the country over the past 3 years.
Let's now shift focus and bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed this week in Sports Action.
Sprint legend Usain Bolt ended his Olympic career by claiming an unprecedented triple-treble and his 9th Olympic gold as Jamaica won the 4x100 meters relay final in Rio. Bolt combined with Asafa Powell, Johan Blake and Nickel Ashmeade to finish in 37.27 seconds. He is the only man to win all 3 sprint events at 3 games. Bolt has claimed gold in the 100 meters, 200 meters and 4x100 meters relay at Beijing 2008, London 2012 and Rio 2016. Argentina won Olympic men's hockey gold for the first time with a 4-2 victory over Belgium in Rio. Tanguy Cousins gave Belgium the lead, but Argentina took control before half-time thanks to goals from Pablo Ibarra, Ignacio Ortiz and Gonzalo Piliet. Germany won the bronze medal with a 4-3 penalty shootout win over Netherlands after the match ended 1-1. Andy Murray became the first tennis player to retain the Olympic singles gold medal after he won the event at the Rio Olympics on Sunday. Murray registered a 7-5, 4-6, 6-2, 7-5 victory over world number 141 Juan Martin Del Potro, who had earlier defeated Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal. Meanwhile, Japan's Kei Nishikori won the bronze medal, defeating Nadal. Former FIFA president João Havelange passed away at the age of 100. Havelange was predecessor to Sepp Blatter at World Football's governing body, serving from 1974 to 1998. He resigned as FIFA's honorary president in April 2013 following an investigation into bribery allegations and was admitted to the hospital the following year with a lung infection. Havelange represented Brazil in swimming at 1936 Olympics before his election to the IOC. Zlatan Ibrahimovic scored twice as Manchester United defeated Southampton 2-0 at Old Trafford. Zlatan's first goal came from a header off a Wayne Rooney cross, while the second came from a successful spot kick. The match marks the season's debut for world record signing Paul Pogba and the first home victory for Jose Mourinho as the Reds' manager.
That's all in this week. We'll be back next week with another edition of World Panorama.